All right, we're back. What's up, guys? So after a few week
How's it
hiatus, we're
going?
back. This is Howdy Partner. My name is Andrew Park. I'm a partner system architect here at AWS, and we normally like to highlight some of the cool things our partners are doing in this space. But today, we're going to change things up a little bit. And so, if you guys caught the last couple episodes I was on, we did a really good job highlighting some of the open source projects that our partners have created. But today, we have a friend and colleague that actually is a maintainer and contributor to an open source project created by our partners. Um, but if this is your first time tuning in, this is Howdy Partner. And again, this is the show where we like to highlight some of the cool things our partners are doing. And I'll let my co-host introduce himself. You guys go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be back. Been on a bunch of these episodes. My name is Jeong. I am also a partner solutions architect and one of your friendly co-hosts of the show. Like Andrew said, we usually use Howdy Partner as a forum to highlight our partners, but today we have a special guest with us, Jonah. So I will toss it over to him to introduce himself.
Hey, yeah, I'm also a partner solutions architect. I just focus on containers, and I just focus with ISVs, like partners. And so I actually work with a project called Falco, which is created by a partner called Sysdig. And so Falco is a CNCF project. It's incubating. It's almost graduated. It's just like at that last hurdle right now. And so it's pretty widely used. So yeah, that's what we'll be talking about today.
Solid. And so one thing that I definitely want to dive into before we start going into the actual Falco project itself is this concept of runtime security with Kubernetes, just because I feel like there's still a lot of misconception around what runtime security actually is and why it's important. Because if you think about what I guess like cybersecurity looked like 10 years ago, obviously when you apply those concepts and fundamentals to container security, those things don't typically match up. And honestly, when you're running your workloads on something like Kubernetes or just even containers built on your own VMs, it's just not going to be enough. And so I think this concept of runtime security is really important. I think it's something that people really need to understand. And I think the Falco project, from what I understand about it, actually helps with that quite a bit. And it's open source. So, it's something that you can just download yourself and start using opposed to having to pay for these insanely expensive enterprise level licenses. So that's one of the things I really liked about it, is that it's all open source. But Jonah, tell us more about runtime security, why it's important, and more importantly, why people should care.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. Security is like an onion, right? And so it's got a bunch of layers. This would kind of be one of what I would call like the center layers. So like once you have like your base level security down, this is like a higher level thing typically. You don't see companies do it day one. It's a thing because like containers are leveraging the Linux kernel. And so you can have another container that's leveraging the Linux kernel, and then using something like eBPF, you can see like the syscalls that container A is doing with your like watcher container. So this would be like Falco in this scenario. And it gives you like a more real-time analysis of like if bad things are happening. So you can have like understand like, oh, is there a root that just opened up in my Redis container? And maybe that's a bad thing, right? So that's kind of why like a little bit of the basics and like why you might care. And it's particularly hard to do. In fact, like AWS doesn't really have an offering for it, which is why so many people, care about Falco project, because we have a whole plethora of security services, but runtime container security is not something we actually provide at the moment. So like you do have to find a third party solution if it's something you're trying to add.
Nice. And so the Falco project was actually created by one of our partners, Sysdig. And then you mentioned earlier that it's a CNCF project. So that means they actually donated the whole thing to the CNCF, correct?
Yeah, so there's a little history. They donated like 90% of it to the CNCF initially.
Okay.
Yep.
Sure.
So I have a little slide deck I could show that will go like sort of over the history, but like recently they just applied for graduation. And one of the requirements is they had to get 100% donation. So they had like this set of libraries that they had not donated because it's kind of proprietary to Sysdig's internal platform. And they finally just donated it because it was like a requirement to graduate. Yeah.
That makes sense.
So it is 100% now.
Nice. Yeah, if you want to talk about the history and kind of what that looks like, yeah, let's throw up the slide deck.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I will like we got like a pretty long demo today, so I won't spend too much time on the slide deck. But
No worries.
let me know if you can see my screen here.
There you go.
Awesome. Are you still able to see it now? I'm in presenter mode here.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, this is about me. We already just talked about all of that. So what is Falco? So it's using the kernel events, the source of truth. One unique thing about Falco, in particular, like with Kubernetes, is that we enrich those syscalls with metadata. And so a good example is if you have a syscall that says like a root process was opened, it's not useful unless you know which pod it was on, which node it was on, things like that. So Falco also will enrich that syscall with the metadata about what and how it happened, and that can be like super useful for debugging when you find like these bad calls. And then they basically will assert those syscalls against like a set of rules it has. And there's a rules language, so you can always go write your own rules, and then it has the ability to alert based off like different kind of criteria you set. Like you want like you can set like some rules to be a higher level than others and only alert on the high level rules. The first commit was in 2016, donated to the CNCF, just the CNF there, in 2018. And then as of, I think, May, the entire thing was donated as it went up for graduation. It's currently incubating. A high level, this has how it works. So applications are doing syscalls because they are sharing a socket, with the kernel. Falco is listening to the kernel. It's using eBPF, which is the extended Berkeley packet filter. So it's a way that you can write code to leverage certain kernel capabilities. And then it will go to this Falco rules engine where it will kind of process against its rules list. And then if it sees like a match, it will enrich it with metadata, such as like the containers, the Kubernetes, and then output it to different sources. Why runtime security? We kind of talked about it a little bit. It's definitely useful for certain things that you can't kind of get in a pipeline. So like you could have things that will change once your container's been running for a while. And it's really useful for like incident response. Sometimes it's hard to know like when a bad actor is happening unless you have some sort of like runtime process. Good example is the previous company I worked at, we had just containers that were spun up that were crypto miners at one point in ECS. And we didn't find out about it until like the next day when we logged in and we're like, why is there so many containers? So, and that's something that runtime security probably would have been able to alert us of. How it fits into the workflow. This is kind of like a marketing slide, but it really is just on like the runtime where it is. But this is like the whole security onion I was talking about in a picture here. What is Falco? So one of the things that they're actually working on right now is making it modular. So there's a pull request right now to enable Falco plugins. So Falco is written in C++, but they are trying to separate out the rules engine from the internal Falco components so that you can write plugins on top of the rules engine in other languages. And so why that might be useful is you could send Falco, like you could have a plugin for ALB logs, right? Like your load balancer logs. And you could also send those to Falco using like a Go plugin and get that same level of like runtime protection against a set of rules, through the same Falco application. And so this is a lot more extendable, and the majority of people just don't write C++ that kind of work in the cloud space. So like extending it out to like something like Go will also help with adoption. Here is cloud native runtime security, kind of what we just talked about. Some of the core principles. It's a very community driven project. There's about 30 to 35, I think, maintainers, and they kind of maintain across like different repos, but generally it's like a very community oriented thing. There's maybe one or two people that are full-time employees from Sysdig that work on it, but a lot of them are people from other companies like myself. It's always focused on the end users. So we have end users from a ton of different companies, and they will kind of push our different like roadmap items, like adding PCI compliance, SOC 2, HIPAA. Any new CVEs that come out, like Falco will typically write a rule for that. So like I think an eBPF CVE just dropped last week. That's kind of been like a hot thing in the community. And we wrote a CVE rule against it like the first day that came out. Again, it's a mitigation rule, but it definitely will provide you that level of security before you're able to like patch your AMIs if that was like an issue that you were worried about. And then it works with a bunch of different vendors here, like it said. Falco is using production at Spotify. They're kind of one of our ambassadors, and they help, like definitely they help stress test some of the Falco components because they run a ginormous amount of workloads with it.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, we had this issue at one point where it was breaking because it was like 32K TPS. And it was like something that you organically wouldn't hit like over 30,000 like events a second in a small enterprise or a small company, you know. So, but yeah, it's just like definitely having end users of this side just helps figure these things out.
No, for sure.
And then Skyscanner, and then here's another diagram of Falco, which is cool. So Falco can also be used on Kubernetes masters. So this is another one to talk about. So like natively with EKS, it doesn't work on the masters at the moment because like we don't put daemon sets on our masters. But if you had like a different service where you had control of your masters, you could totally run Falco on the master nodes as well and monitor those the security of those.
Wait, just a real quick question on that, because you caught my curiosity there. So for example, like if I were to deploy like an EKS cluster, like you don't actually like see like the master nodes. So if you wanted to install Falco like on your EKS cluster, specifically in master nodes, like what does that process actually look like? Just out of curiosity.
You couldn't, but if you had like cops or a different thing, you could.
Oh, so you'd have to do it via like. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Because Falco runs as a daemon set, and you can't put daemon set on the master nodes currently.
Exactly.
In EKS. Yeah.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
So one of like the biggest issues with Falco is you get like this great data, but it's all being emitted basically by this Falco process, and it's not super consumable. And so a few years ago, the Falco Sidekick project was born, and so this is another microservice. And it's going to act like in a client-server relationship with Falco. And the entire point of Falco Sidekick is it's going to take in data. It's going to, have some sort of filtering rules and then send it off to different sources. And so this is really useful because you could say, here could be the way you would filter and say, only severity level 1s I send to my Slack room, right? So this could also be through Sidekick or Datadog or Prometheus. You could send it to 10 different things. Like you can be like a fan out, so it can act kind of like in the way like a queue would work as well. And so the Falco Sidekick is definitely like the best way to like send out events, because otherwise Falco only supports sending to like one source at the moment. Like it sends to like an HTTP or gRPC server. So if you leverage something like this, you can fan it out to all the different things your company uses. And then we're just going to talk quickly about the rules. So like we ship with a bunch of different default rules. There's over 65. This slide's is slightly old. And then there's a bunch of different audit rules that are like Kubernetes specific. And then the system rules are more like Linux specific. The common ones we see are like privilege escalation, executing a shell on the container, but it can be things like creating a service account, in your Kubernetes cluster. So we have extended it out to like Kubernetes specific scenarios as well. And again, you can go in and edit these rules on your deployment or add your own if you'd like. A common one we see for EKS is people will allow the kubelet node for like ECR repository, because there's a rule for like unknown ECR repositories. So people will allow in like the whitelist, like the AWS ones, because like kubelet comes from like a specific like AWS account. So they'll whitelist that. here's the rule examples. So it's like a pretty simple language here. You honestly can kind of just read it and see. So like container ID does not equal host and proc name equal bash, right? So it's all if, not, and statements basically. And then it does things like a simple list. Like, are there system binaries being written in bin, sbin, user bin, or user sbin? So that's why like we're so quick to like write rules for new CVEs, because it has this very simple language that you can write. Like, and here is a Sysdig free trial thing. Slide off. And here's some resources. So the falco.org, GitHub, Falco security are great ways to start. We have a really great docs for this project, so definitely worth taking a look.
Sounds good. And so I guess before we move even further, Jeong, what is the show? What are we talking about? Why are we here? Let the people know, man.
Yeah, so here we are at Howdy Partner. The show is about us highlighting cool things our partners are doing. This episode is a little slightly different just because we're talking about a Falco project, which technically was born out of one of our partners, Sysdig, but it's now an open source CNCF project. So as a matter of fact, we have one of our other friendly partner solutions architect here, Jonah, to talk to us more about Falco, and he just kind of went through some of the high level information about Falco and how it works, the rules and things like that, and he's going to prepare us with a cool demo, hopefully, that he's getting ready for us. So if you have any questions, post them in the chat, and we'll surface them up to Jonah.
Make sure to ask as many questions as you can, because this is a cool project. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, Jonah, if you want to get into the demo and show us how this works, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry I missed that question, but it looks like it got answered 10 minutes ago. Yep. But yeah, like we'll jump into the demo here. So fingers crossed everything is working today or wants to work.
Well, if it doesn't work, we'll see how you fix the problems. We'll get to see your amazing skills on display.
Definitely. So the demo is in my GitHub right here. So I'll just post this in the or if you want to post this in the chat, Andrew, so people are welcome to follow along or try this after. Everything is totally runnable yourself. I'm just in a general EKS cluster that's pretty fresh right now. So awesome. So I have all in this kind of shell script, and then as I go through it, I'll just kind of talk what we're doing, and then I have some tabs up on my Chrome that we'll be checking out as we install certain things, and then we can kind of talk about it. So it's not a security demo if I don't do mutual TLS. So you see a bunch of open SSL commands here, and Falco does support mutual TLS and a client server mode between its different other microservices. So I figured, I would add it just because it's kind of cool. But you totally don't have to do this if you're just running Falco yourself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste all these OpenSSL commands. And you're going to see a bunch of stuff just showed up here, like my client and server keys and stuff like that. And then we are going to install Falco. And so here I'm setting my certs for the mutual TLS into the Helm install as well. And there's some other things here. So I'm outputting a gRPC and an HTTP output because I'm going to be sending gRPC data to a Prometheus exporter and HTTP data to a Falco Sidekick. And it will just take a minute, but we can take a look, and it's starting up the pods here. And so there's nothing cool to see yet, but Falco is kind of starting up, so that's a good sign. So now we're going to install the Falco exporter, which this is the, maybe I will just change this a little bit so it's a little easier. So I'm going to install the Falco exporter now. And so this is going to take our Falco events and send them in Prometheus format. And then we should be able to view those later when we install Grafana and see what's going on. And so it gives you some commands if you wanted to like go port forward, and you could check out, and it would be a Prometheus metrics endpoint if you've seen those before, which is just like a bunch of like text, because like the Prometheus stats are like in plain text, so just a bunch of plain text stats basically about Falco events. It's not super exciting, but and then we will install Falco Sidekick. One thing to note is I'm going to turn the UI on, so the web UI equals enabled. And I'm going to actually be setting a routing rule in my Helm install. So I'm going to be sending it to a log group that I have pre-created. So we will be able to go take a look at those in AWS as well. All right, so now we have the Falco exporter, and the Falco Sidekick, and the Falco Sidekick UI. So we should have a good group of pods right now, all starting to spin up. So I see Falco, exporter, Sidekick UI. And so one important thing about Falco is like all of these other pieces really need Falco events to trigger. Like they're just waiting for Falco to tell them stuff. And so if I'm in like a fresh cluster like this where nothing is happening, like there's no security events that are like bad things, no bad things are happening right now in my cluster. So Falco is just sitting there and waiting. And so what we have to do is we have to like start up an event generator that's going to start a bunch of bad processes in my cluster for me. And this will all trigger the default rules for Falco, which will then spread out to all of our different sources. So this is the events generator. It's actually a project that the Falco community created, and it just helps us like when we're testing and development. So. And again, I don't need to run this for very long because it spawns a bunch of bad processes in my cluster. So I can already take a look, and it's like spun up host network deployment. And I can take a look again, and it's probably spinning up more things. Sensitive mount deployment, privilege deployment. So I'll let this run for a few minutes, and then we'll kill it. If it runs too long, I'm worried it might just take over my whole cluster, to be honest.
So basically, all the things that you would just like, you'd start freaking out over if you're like a security admin, or if you're like, if you're like an SRE, like, Jesus.
Exactly. Except this one's doing like one bad thing a second, and they go really fast because like some of them are like spinning up new resources in my cluster. So
okay, makes sense.
So normally you wouldn't organically see bad things happen that often in your clusters, but. So now we'll deploy, all right, so I'll kill this for now, and we can turn it back on a little bit later.
You said these events are running every second, is that what you said?
They are running, yeah, so if you actually go to the event generator, it has like a simple UI. So if you were, if you wanted to change some of the things, you could go to the deployment and change this command right here, like with different CLI flags. Sorry, I didn't mean UI, I meant CLI. So like mine says run loop. So mine will basically run forever, but you could like set it to only run 50 events if you would like.
For sure.
So now I'm gonna install Prometheus. And at this point, we actually wanna go, we're gonna go like take a look at Prometheus. Maybe I need to restart the event generator because maybe it wasn't getting stored previously. That's all right. All right, we'll go restart the event generator for a few while we're waiting. Normally you would have a Prometheus, kind of already running in your cluster. So, but I'm pretty sure that, yeah, just because of the way the scrapes work and everything. And then I'm going to install Grafana as well while we're here. And so, yeah, the Falco exporter is the first thing we're going to take a look at. So we'll go take a look at Prometheus and go check out our what's going on in there. Let me double check if they're up and running. So we do have Prometheus running now. So yeah, probably just gives it about 1 minute. I think the default scrape interval is every minute. So that's probably all we need to give it. And then, yeah, I will kill the event generator here as well for a little bit. All right. Yeah, so what we'll do is we're going to port forward our Prometheus just so I can see it on like my Chrome tab. I didn't go all out and like launch load balancers for this demo, but hopefully they should suffice. And if we go to our Prometheus, we go to this graph function now. So we can just go to the base graph here, and then we can start typing, and we see the different like inputs that the Falco exporter is giving it. So it's not a lot right now, but it's mostly just Falco events. But inside the Falco events, you can actually see that there is some information about which event rule is being broken, right? So like right below RPM database, right below root, right below Etsy, system, run shell untrusted. So these are just some of the things that we'll actually be able to hopefully view in our Grafana dashboard as well.
So these are the rules that come shipped with the standard Falco, and then anything else you could probably add on top of this. Okay.
Exactly. Yep. Andrew Park is looking quite nice today. Agreed.
It's all confidence there.
Yeah. So now that we know that Prometheus is running and it's getting these rules, we want to see what it looks like in Grafana, right? Because it's not, Prometheus itself isn't the most usable either, like looking at this data. So what we're going to do is we're going to go take a look. We see Grafana is running. So if you do a base install of Grafana, it will actually create a secret for you. And you can just like do like a base 64 decode to figure out what your password's going to be. I doubt people are like have enough tenacity to figure out and type that themselves right now, but
I'd be impressed.
Wow, you just never know, since we're talking about security today.
Yeah. And then this is actually localhost 3000. So I can open a new tab and go localhost 3000 here. And I can pull my password. So it's always going to be admin, and then whatever your password is going to be the first install. This is like a base Grafana install. Like you can set your data sources in your Helm, but I just didn't because I was lazy. So I just need to go add a data source. Since Prometheus is in the same cluster, it should just be Prometheus 9090, I believe. So let's save and test. Okay, data source is working. That's a good sign. And now I'm going to go import a dashboard. So there is a Falco dashboard that's been created by the community. Leo de Grasso, I think I saw was the author. This is the number, but you can go Google it or create your own if you'd like. So this just is one we're going to import. And then the Prometheus data source. So this is all of our Falco exported events. So here we can see our events all spiked when we turn the event generator on. But we also can go take a drill into the actual events, and we can see like a count of each. So like right below root was triggered a bunch of times on this particular host. And then some were triggered less here. So like system user interactive, run shell untrusted. And then, using this data, you could then try to like figure out what's going on. Like this one's interesting because it's a cube system one, and I was running everything in a Falco namespace. So that's like one I might drill into because I am curious what happened there. Yeah, so it looks like Falco Sidekick is somehow running in cube system, which is something I wasn't aware of. So it doesn't always give you like 100% exactly like what's going on, but it lets you know something bad is going on. And then you as like that cluster administrator or SRE would then, go and dig into it. And that's kind of like the goal of Falco, right?
So let me ask you this. So let's say like an event does happen and you get notified. Does Falco also have mechanisms where it will just block that process completely, or is it just more of like a notification tool? Not tool, but
Yeah.
it'll just give you a notification.
Yeah, so Falco Sidekick does have the ability to do something like that. So in Falco Sidekick, you can set different types of outputs. And if you take a look, they're kind of like sorted by chat, metric observability. One that is particularly interesting here is this fast serverless one. And so there is a blog out there of using kubeless to actually inside the same cluster to basically kill a pod if you see a bad process spawned. It's not something I necessarily know if it's, there's pros and cons, because if you kill a pod, then you lose that audit history, right?
Yeah.
But you could use like a fast or serverless option to be triggered, and then to maybe potentially, because they would have that metadata in the event, you could like actually go kill it if you wanted, or stop it or something.
Because the reason why I ask is I think it was maybe a couple weeks or the last episode I was on, we brought on the folks that created Caverno. And what I thought was interesting about that was within Caverno, they actually have mechanisms where it'll actually just stop the process without you losing the logs. So I was just curious, like using this with something like Caverno as like an enforcement like agent, I guess, running in the background would be interesting. But I was just curious if Falco had built-in capabilities, much like Caverno. So I was just curious.
Yeah, not built in. I know Sysdig does have something like that built in, and I think that's kind of one of the draws of the enterprise project.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah, so this is kind of like our Falco dashboard, and this is like the base one. You could just get up and running in like 10 minutes if you wanted to get Falco running. So that's like one of the projects of the ecosystem. So the next one we'll take a look at is the Sidekick, unless there's any other questions about this. Hopefully it's kind of like self-explanatory. It's Prometheus and Grafana.
Yep, nothing yet.
Yeah, awesome. So similar, we're gonna port forward our Sidekick. The Sidekick UI is pretty cute looking here. It's got like, it's all the Sidekick logo is.
I think we got a glimpse of it earlier, or just now, I guess.
Always one in these demos. All right, let me try this one more time. All right, there we go. So immediately looking at here, it's pretty useful about giving you like a snapshot of like what's been happening in your cluster recently. One thing to note is you see how it says 200 total. The Falco Sidekick UI has a retention of only 200 events because it's not meant to be a long-term store like Prometheus or a log or a bucket. It really just stores everything in memory at this point, and it's meant to be like a way that filters and ships it out to other things like a queue, if you would like to think about it that way. So here we were able to actually kind of look through our like different events, like which ones have been called. So like right below root again is definitely our most called, and we can do a simple sort by like something like time range. So like what's in the last 30 minutes, what's in the last 15 minutes, and everything for us is in the last 15 minutes, right? Just because we can see we ran it, like at 28, so 10 minutes ago. So this is a nice like way to just get a nice snapshot of what's going on if you don't have Grafana set up, if you want something that's a little simpler than like a whole Prometheus Grafana setup. And you can actually dig into the events here and actually see all the different metadata that Falco is enriching it with. So it's actually pretty cool. So here you can see like a single event, and you can actually see the entire metadata here, and then it breaks it out into like a more readable format here by like putting them in different blocks. So you can see like the K8 pod name, the container image repository where this is pulled from, the event time, the Docker container ID, the process name, the login, user ID, even the namespace, things like that. Like where did it write that file directory to? So it was Etsy shadow. And then this was the actual command that they used to write that. So it was like HEB log run, blah, 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 right? And so here you can get all this information in a very human readable way. And so it's a pretty useful thing to check out if you're just trying to see what's going on. And then also, like we talked about, you can set different like levels of reporting. So here you might say, okay, anything that's an emergency level, like send directly to our Slack room or alert level. But anything that's in these, we just maybe will send to our long-term retention because we might have some sort of big data process to like churn over those later, right? And so that's a super useful thing is this Sidekick can be the filter for you. So I'll pause if there's any questions before I move on to the next piece.
Yeah, there's a quick
So
question.
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, in the chat, let's see. Falco would be used with, I think, with OPA. So you can get notifications about quote unquote bad behaviors and then apply policies through OPA. So I guess what he's asking is like, how would you use this with a tool like Gatekeeper or Caverna? Like, what would be like the best way to go about that? I think is what he's trying to ask.
I don't know. I think they're complementary. I don't know if they're directly used together easily. But this one is really for things happening directly inside of the container that like OPA doesn't have any visibility for. And OPA is typically more used for like the actual like Kubernetes objects that I've seen, or like how things are run or ran. Like OPA might like stop a Docker container from running if it's running as root, right? Where this one's going to say, oh, somebody went into Etsy and wrote a new file, right?
That makes sense.
So
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, all I was gonna say was what you'll see a lot is people use Gatekeeper with Caverna because Caverna will actually has properties that will actually block certain processes. So for example, like if you like escalate privileges to root and then try and create a namespace and install or deploy like a bit mining whatever into your cluster, what you'll actually see with Caverna is that it'll actually send a message saying that your request was denied, and then it'll just stop the process altogether. And so if I'm thinking about this correctly, like I could totally see how like you could use Caverna in conjunction with something like Falco Sidekick. But to Jonah's point, like, yeah, I'm not sure how Gatekeeper would actually integrate with Falco, just based on what I'm seeing here. But you should check out Caverna because I think that is a tool that you'll see integrated a lot with other security tools. So just check it out. I'll even post it in the chat.
Yeah, I don't see anything about OPA or Caverna in here. It would probably come directly from the Sidekick, but if somebody is interested in writing a PR for that, like that could totally be like a new thing we could try out, or so like we could add that as a new event source if it was something that was doable. I think the only hard part would be switching the formats because I know that OPA event formats and Falco formats would be different. So we created this log group earlier, so we're gonna go take a look at that. I'll just go turn my event generator on for a little bit too. It's been a little too quiet. That's the delete. And then what I did before this call happened was I set up an alarm actually in my account. So we're going to go take a look at that. So my alarm is going to alarm whenever I have an incoming log event from Falco Sidekick. And I set Falco Sidekick to only alert on things above the info level. And what I did is I am sending it to an SNS topic here. And my SNS topic is going to be sending to this new Gmail I made called it's for Knative Meetup. So I have this new email address. And so this might be like how a typical workflow would look in a company if you were interested in sending high-level events to like a security team or security alias, right? Is we could send it to something like a long-term storage retention like CloudWatch logs. So I'll take a look at my log stream. I can see that I don't, let's resume. So it might take a second for the new logs to come in because I just returned it on. So yeah, so I'm seeing everything from 43 to start to come in right now because I just turned the event generator on. And so what it does is you could set this alarm to be something higher than 1 data point. I set it at 1 data point, just, I just wanted to go off when the first thing came in. And then you could have some sort of alarm like this go to an email. So like Falco Sidekick directly could go to an SMTP, like an email. But in that scenario, you're going to be losing the long-term retention, right? So you could use something like this where you send it to Splunk or Elasticsearch or CloudWatch first, and then you can alert on it from there, right? So we should check our inbox and see. So it looks like it's went off at 4:43. So I turned it on about 2 minutes ago. So it went off 1 minute ago. And so here it sent me a notification saying that my alarm is going off because I have data in my log group, which is the data would only be from malicious events. So that's kind of like a workflow of how you actually might weave Falco in to like your actual company and get real data from it.
So you would essentially use this, and I guess with the different categories, or I was going to say color coded, but categories to essentially fan out to different integration sources that you may have. I mean, one example here was email, but obviously if somebody's using Slack or Jira or any other resources, then that's a way to kind of fan things out.
Yeah, you could totally do it in a fan out thing. Again, if it was me and I'm working at a company, I would probably only set these top 3 to go to my Slack room because they would get really noisy. But I might have some sort of alarm that would say, hey, if I'm getting over 100 log events per minute from Falco, then something's probably wrong. So then I would want that to alert an alias, like an on-call alias, to go check it out, right? So that would be the difference there. I wouldn't want this directly emailing that alias with every single individual event. I might send it to a log system and say if there, if there's an abnormal amount of logs coming in, then email whoever's the on-call person is to go take a look.
By the way, I love the gopher with the wings. I just think it's hilarious.
Oh yeah,
looking at it. It's so funny.
Yeah, it's pretty cute. You probably can guess what Falco Sidekick is written in, huh?
Yeah, I feel like you can only guess so many languages.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that was the demo. I guess it went faster than I thought because everything worked. So.
No worries. When your demo works and there's no issues, that's a good day, especially when you're live. So that's awesome. Yeah, just a quick question for you, man. So you're obviously a maintainer of this project in particular. How did you personally get started working on this project and get to kind of where you are now?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing too is there's maintainers across all the different sub parts of this project. So I do just the testing for it. That's all I work on. So I don't actually do the actual development of Falco, the kernel module. I don't write C++, but I handle its testing and its integration with different OSs and building the driver kit to make. So I handle all of that stuff, ARM support, anything that would be just adding more testing or features around it, basically. And I, about a year ago, I got more involved in the Kubernetes upstream test infrastructure, and they were using Prow at the time. Which, if you don't know what Prow is, it's a an open source native CI/CD system that's built for GitHub pull requests. So you're welcome to link this. This is actually Falco's Prow setup here. So this is all public. And at the time, I was kind of trying to find out if there was any companies that were using it and AWS. And at the time, nobody was. It was just only Google and Prow. right?
Oh, interesting.
And so I found Falco was using it, and they're AWS customers, but they weren't running it on AWS. They're running it on Packet.io. And I talked to them and I was asking like, hey, like, have you guys ever tried this on AWS? Like, I'm trying to see if it's possible for like a kind of like this paper that I'm writing for an internal like service I'm proposing, right? And then we ended up talking, and they were interested in running on AWS. So I helped them kind of like figure that out. And then I ended up kind of like making some upstream contributions in the process because it was kind of like a new venture doing it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think Falco and EKSD are like the first two projects that were running Prow on AWS really at the time. So it was they both kind of were, cutting ground a little bit. And then naturally, just as this relationship matured, like more and more stuff like popped up, and I was always there to help out. So what like JFrog Artifactory shut down basically. And so Falco is hosting all of its binaries there, and I helped them like get it up on like S3 and CloudFront and everything.
Nice.
And then Packet.io shut down, so I helped them move all of our testing to AWS. And then I helped them get like sandbox credits, so they could like separate their AWS account from Sysdig, so they could like kind of hit that graduation criteria of being like fully open source.
Nice.
And then obviously just like fixing a bunch of tests and PRs. And I think eventually like 6 or 8 months in, they just, put my name up for maintainer in a meeting, and it was a vote. So it wasn't anything spectacular, but.
No, it's cool. And then I guess what advice would you have for people that like want to get into open source and kind of get to where you are, where you're a maintainer, and you're doing all the things that you're doing right now with Falco? Because I know I've gotten that question quite a bit, and my answers are always like super high level and super basic, but thought you might be able to give better advice than I can on this.
It sounds really lame, but it just like find something that you're passionate about. It would be like the first, like I was really passionate about like this, like I thought Prow was like the coolest thing ever. And I thought it was like really game changing. And so it made it really easy working on open source when it was working on something that I liked doing. So instead of like trying to find a big project that you might just want to contribute to say you did, I would try to say find something that it is like supremely interests you, or that you're like really curious about, because you're more apt to actually like do more work or like push through it if it gets hard. And then, the goal is not always to become a maintainer. But like if you end up just coming back and doing more and more, then, it might just happen. But there's definitely a lot of open source other like PRs for other things. I've like sent in bug fixes or like things that I'm, it's just like a one-off. But you're just trying to help out. I generally do a lot of like the little ones like that to help out the AWS community. So like the cluster autoscaler or like little things like that when I notice that there's issues.
For sure. And the thing is, like at least in like our space in particular, when it comes to Kubernetes, like there's so many different projects, it's like overwhelming. You know what I mean? Like if you look at that service map that the CNCF released, where it's just like all these tiny little boxes and all these different projects, like I feel like your options are literally limitless in terms of like where you can start and like what you want to contribute to. So yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment for sure.
Yeah. It's gonna be pretty overwhelming. But
I mean, it's already overwhelming now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, honestly, like fixing stuff in the AWS, like AWS is really taking like a hard stance on trying to be better at open source, and like we have a lot of projects that have bugs, or not bugs, but like they're missing certain features, and like so even just like fixing things in our upstream is awesome. If you're ever able to do that. If you find something like our EBS CSI was missing IAM role service account support, which is not, but if it was, right, like that's an easy way to like put a PR in, because there's a lot of projects that were created before IAM role service accounts came out, and so they might not have that support still, right? Little things like that are good first steps to getting started. Like we switched our metadata lookup to like a SIG v2 or something like that. And so a lot of the projects that were doing metadata lookups, like Cluster Autoscaler, had to be switched to that. And they're really simple fixes, but they're like little things that can kind of be a nice like way to start into your open source journey, where it's like, I'm changing one line of code, but it actually, you know, rather than trying to go write a whole like feature.
100%. Totally agreed.
Yeah.
But other than that, when it comes to Falco, I'm sure you guys are obviously working on different features and, you know, different things to come out, you know, as the project evolves. Anything that people that want to dive into Falco should be on the lookout for? Do you guys actually have a public roadmap on the GitHub? I get it's like a security tool, so like I can understand, I could see how there wouldn't be, but just thought I'd ask.
I don't think there is a public roadmap on GitHub, but we have community calls that anyone is free to join on Wednesdays. So like they're Wednesday morning if you're US based. A lot of the Falco developers and maintainers are based in Italy, so but anyone's welcome to join those. And typically in the roadmaps, like you'll also see like past week's roadmap notes. Like we keep it all in a HackMD that's public, and so in there people will talk about proposals or like PRs they're working on, and so it can kind of give you an idea of like what is happening behind the scenes. Like the whole plugin system is a really big one right now that is I think will be like huge if it actually works out correctly.
For sure. Cool. Yeah. You have any questions, comments?
No, I mean, this is a great session on just Falco in general and open source, I guess, overall, and great to see you doing great work. I actually didn't quite understand like the role of a maintainer. I'm starting to get a little bit. I've always heard, you know, somebody's maintainer for, you know, a certain project, but didn't really think about what that really means. So you gave a great insight to some of that,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I would say that I approve PRs if they're testing related. Like, so there's like maybe 5 people who can approve PRs if they're testing related, and I'm one of them. So also when a test system breaks, probably there's only like 5 of us that can fix it. So like I will also be fixing stuff when they break. Generally, that would be like the simplest way to say it is kind of like I just help dictate like what gets input into the whole testing system and then help fix it if it breaks.
But that in
Sounds
itself
cool.
is such an important role, though. You know what I mean? Like, if I can totally imagine if there's only one maintainer that does all the testing, and you know this person goes out on vacation or whatever. Like, you can only imagine how much of a nightmare that would be.
Yeah, it's definitely you definitely want to have multiple people who are like interested and able to like debug. Like honestly, there's so many great products out there that just don't have a user base, and that can be really difficult because those. Like sometimes like the best project is one that nobody's using, you know, and really the only
100%.
projects that do well are the ones that have like users behind them. So they like somebody who just happens to be adding a lot of like tests or like adding stuff that has to do with the tests naturally we might like have them like give them access to like help do some debugging, and then if they're doing well, they might just become another maintainer because we're always looking for more people who are interested, right? So
Totally. So yeah, so if someone wants to get started with the Falco project, is it really just simple as forking the repo, or submitting a PR and just going from there? Or I mean, how would you recommend someone getting started with contributing to Falco?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of contributions they come in different ways, right? Sure. So like one might be like a rule contribution, right? Like if you use Falco and your company and you like write some custom rules, like a rule contribution might be an easy one. Another common one is like, because of the way that Falco works, we have to build different driver kits for every different kernel. So we will consistently have new people come in and just be like, hey, like my company runs this EKS node and the kernel is not supported by Falco. Because when they go to like launch Falco, it will error out and say it couldn't find it. And so I'll show you our, this is where you would go check to see if your kernel is supported or not, right? And so one of the simplest PRs they can do is they can just go to our test-infra org and add the kernel that they want to be built to our build process. Nice. And then the build process will build it and download, copy it to that S3 bucket that is hosting that site right there. So like there's a lot of little contributions that, and most of them kind of happen because you use Falco. So like that would probably be the first way to start, is just like use it and try it out.
Makes sense, for sure. Cool. Well, other than that, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. But appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. I know I learned a lot about Falco because so for everyone that's still tuned in, like I work with Jeong directly, like we're on the same team. So I think the first thing I heard about you was that you were a maintainer of this project. So it's good to learn more about it. Good to understand how people contribute to it. But other than that, man, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun being on here.
Yeah, no worries. But other than that, we are here every Wednesday, 2 p.m. Pacific to 4 p.m. Pacific. Every week we have a new partner or a new project that we're talking about. So make sure to subscribe for notifications. But other than that, Jeong, sign us out, man.
So before you do that, I guess one minor announcement. I think starting in 2 weeks, we're back on Mondays and Wednesdays. It used to be.
There you go.
For those of you who've been watching our show, well, technically this is season 2. So if you've been watching us since season 1, we used to run the show from 2 to 4 Pacific time, Mondays and Wednesdays, and we went back to just Wednesdays. Now the show's coming back for Mondays and Wednesdays, so be on the lookout for, I think, 2 Mondays from this past month.
Okay, I actually take that back. I did not know that we had the Mondays back. So with that said, if there's an open source project or a product that you want us to review and get our opinion on and you want us to deep dive into, like let us know. Our Twitter handles are in our bio right there. So feel free to tweet us with the different project or product you want us to do a deep dive on, and obviously more than happy to do that on stream. So let us know, because apparently we have Mondays and Wednesdays back. So, just more room for different products. So other than that, Jeong, okay, now for real, sign us out.
Sounds good. So as you may or may not know, Jonah, we have a special way of signing off here at Howdy Partner. As you probably see from the title itself, it's a very specific theme of phrases that you can choose from. So you get a choice of 3. First phrase is "giddy up." Second is I think you get the drift here. Second one is "happy trails," and the last one is "see y'all next time." So pick your favorite, I suppose.
Hey, you're the guest, man, so you get to choose.
Oh, we'll definitely "giddy up" since the most embarrassing. We're gonna pick it.
Okay. All right. So I guess we'll do a count of 3, 2, 1, and then sign off with "giddy up." So a count of 3, 2, 1.
Giddy up.
Giddy up. All right, folks, we're gonna be back next Wednesday, 2 p.m. So make sure to subscribe for notifications. But other than that, we're signing out. Thanks, Jonah. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care, everyone.